Mr. Burgess, would you, this is my presentation, I think will be regarded as a feast of Sabians. And with you being a world authority on the Sabian symbols, I'm wondering if you have, for those who are not familiar, maybe just a concise fortune cookie sense of what the Sabian symbols are. Would you have that?
Of course. Whereas normal astrology divides the circle into 12 to get zodiac signs, Sabian symbols works on the division of the circle into 360. So you have one particular degree to study rather than a batch. So rather than my being just Taurus, I'm the 16th degree of Taurus in my sun sign. Now this allows for a very precise tuning in to the essence of a person. And we're given symbols within which we can do that, but these symbols are far from rational. They're non-rational. They were channeled by a medium, and so we have to develop our intuition and our rational sense of logic to try and understand them as they apply to us individually. My own sense is that our own personal interpretation is as valid as the masters, Rudyard and Jones and Elsie Wheeler herself. I think that all of us in this group and many thousands, well, thousands around the world, we're all tuning into the source of this wisdom. And that source is called Sabian. That was the word first used by Elsie Wheeler. And I believe that the Sabians had a place on earth. They're mentioned in the Quran. They're a real group of people. And I think they're associated with the temple at Göbekli Tepe, the oldest astronomical feature in world history. So I think that we're actually studying material that has been on the planet for 12,000 years.
Wow.
Will that do?
That's the strategic overview. Thank you so much. So I guess it's about time to get started with my presentation. Okay. Yes. And we'll go with share screen. And here we go. All right. I've been anticipating this particular day for a couple of 3 years now. It came as a visionary encounter with my own subconscious, and I've been nurturing the vision ever since, and just trying to listen for the next stage and the next step, not knowing what was coming next, but it's been a glorious journey. So I'm hoping to share the essence of that with you so that you, like myself, can get a deeper sense of what this, at least the Saturn-Uranus cycle, is all about. This is the first of 3 perfect squares between Saturn and Uranus. The next one will be on June 14th, and then a following December 23rd square. So there's as I'm seeing it now, a threefold process here that's ready to unfold. And we're at the very beginning. We're at the generation stage with the February 17th event. With June 14th, I see more concentration. So we have generation, concentration. Then by December 23rd, we have distribution. So these are the cardinal, the fixed, and the mutable, the 3 qualities that we're familiar with. So I anticipate more adventure as we move through this year. So here we are exploring the current Saturn-Uranus cycle from a humanistic transpersonal astrological perspective. As has been said, Dane Rudyard has been a major mentor for myself, for Radlina, and for others of you. Rudyard, the philosopher, the astrologer, the metaphysician, from his book, From Humanistic to Transpersonal Astrology. The highest purpose of how best to act so that the closed center of the ego may open up to the power of his Dharma. Dharma as a term refers to the truth. So to find our way into the essence of our truth is really what the journey is all about. On the right, there are different domains of consciousness on that journey, and each planetary orbit indicates one of those levels. There are multiple levels. We have to Saturn, the personal, or I'm sorry, Mercury to Mars, the Jupiter, Saturn, the social collective planets. We have Chiron as the bridge between Saturn. And then we have the three outer planets, what Rudyard refers to as the ambassadors. So these are all zones of consciousness that we pass through in our ascension. So Saturn, the ego, is the Saturnian structure, is the expression of one's capacity for consistency in behavior. And it is the foundation of one's I. Represents essentially the power enabling man to ascend from one level of consciousness, that is, to experience a true metamorphosis. Encounter Uranus on our path, we can expect the unexpected. The energetic of constant transformation. It's a principle, it's never ending. If we encounter it, there are ways to, or not. Working consciously with it, always my deepest challenge. And we look to artists to help us understand this dynamic. Alex Gray painting, the visionary psychedelic artist Alex Gray. The whole of what I'm sharing with you is sourced in my direct experience of the Saturn-Uranus cycle back in 1988, when I took in a conference at the Banff Springs Hotel in Alberta, Canada. I lived about 50 miles from that hotel, and at the very last minute, I jumped out of bed and made my way to the conference. On October 18th, 1988, the culmination of 3 exact conjunctions of Saturn and Uranus occurred at Sag 2749, which is this signature of galactic center, the location of galactic center. In honor of the occasion, an astrological conference called Galactica 88 was held at the world-famous Banff Springs Hotel. I attended the conference, came away from it feeling completely attuned to the Saturn-Uranus cycle, a feeling that persists to this day. Now, I think of that as my entry point into the cycle. I actually crawled inside the cycle, is what it feels like. And I think this is a key to working with any cycle of relationship. Is there's a new moon entry door to every cycle, but we can also tune in at later stages. But that fundamental source point is very significant. So here I'm taking the Saturn-Uranus cycle, seeing it as a sine wave. Why is that? Well, this is let's say a longitudinal representation of what we're more familiar with, which is the lunation cycle. So what we have here is the basic structure of the lunation cycle with its 8 major sectors. So from a new moon point at the left there, along the horizontal axis, we have keywords emerge into expansion, action at the first quarter square, overcoming as we come up to the full moon. That 1966 date there indicates the full moon, which initiates a fulfillment stage, which then moves into a demonstration stage. So that from the vision, we move to demonstration of what that vision represents. And then, as is inevitable, as the world keeps turning, we have to begin a descending process. The form or the flower is wilting, the seeds are beginning to form. And these last 2 sectors are all about the formation of seed, which represents the power sourcing the next, in this case, Saturn-Uranus cycle. Now, I was born in 1949. When I determined where within this Saturn-Uranus cycle I was born, it puts me right up there towards the first quarter square, which was in 1951. So this is another point of entry into the cycle. And for me, it has added significance because being born at that time puts my Pallas Athena at exactly the same degree as the conjunction in 1942. So that would indicate that I have a particular resonance with this particular cycle. I'm not the only person, as my research had indicated. As I shared a couple of weeks ago with Red Lena's group, Jimi Hendrix was born in 1942, right at the source of that particular Saturn-Uranus cycle, just prior to the first atomic blast, which was in 1945. So I think when we look to the life of that person through the lens of the Saturn-Uranus cycle, a lot can be understood. We see Jimi Hendrix, who was really a meteoric personality on the world stage. You know, he was empowered, in my way of thinking, by this particular Saturn-Uranus dynamic. And it really, it's an archetypal presence that he's revealing here. This is the pattern of the life of a particular personality seen through the lens of Saturn-Uranus. Well, my research took me into other realms with this archetype or this cycle. And of course, that brings us into the present moment, the current phase of this cycle puts us at the last quarter square. Now, the keynotes that we see on the right here regarding this portion of the cycle, we're in this zone now for very specifically over this year. And then the process will be moving on from the crisis in consciousness that I think you will agree pervades much of humanity at this moment. There is the opportunity and the need, if we're going to live in attunement, in harmonious attunement with this unfolding cycle, there's the need to consciously change, to reorient ourselves. And as we move along in the cycle over the next few years, up to 2032, there's a whole process out in front of us that we can be conscious of. And that is the approach I'm taking here, is how to be more and more conscious of this particular cycle. Redline, I've lost my cursor and there's someone waiting to join us. Thank you.
Yes, I had my sound off, but yes, all good.
Good, thank you.
E como?
A couple of years ago, in 2017, I wrote an article which is available on my lightningpath.net website, and it's titled "Bitcoin Emergence and the Saturn-Uranus Cycle." So this was me tracking consciously that the Saturn-Uranus cycle. There were some very specific turning points, and when I discovered that Bitcoin, the emergence of Bitcoin, which is a revolutionary new technology, when I realized that it had a very deep resonance with this current Saturn-Uranus cycle, I was moved to investigate and to explore. And a lot of what I'm sharing here has come as a result of that particular inspiration. Bitcoin is a bank in cyberspace. Deposit the amount of money you wish to keep. Now, this is Michael Saylor, and you're going to learn more about Michael shortly. But in terms of a revolutionary new technology, Bitcoin has arrived and is slowly being integrated into the mainstream culture. And it is fundamentally different than the current world financial model. We'll see more about that shortly. As Michael says, Bitcoin is a swarm of cyber hornets serving the goddess of wisdom, feeding on the fire of truth, exponentially growing ever smarter, faster, and stronger behind a wall of encrypted energy. There's your fortune cookie for what Bitcoin is and could be from one of the major spokesmen in the field now. So the current Saturn-Uranus cycle, conjunction at galactic center in 1988. In 1988, and this was the key clue that I received as to a larger pattern here, and that got me on the crypto exploration vector. And that was realizing that in 1988, Tim May, an anarchist, published the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto. And this was within a group on the internet at that time, like a mailing list. This is very early internet. But this relatively small group of cryptologists were developing ways and means of using cryptology to support people, especially individuals. And it had that anarchist kind of orientation. But by over those years, from 1988 to 2008, we have the cypherpunks that Tim was associated with. And they, as a small group, a very small group of brilliant technologists, were developing this new technology. Then very mysteriously, in 2008, which is exactly at the full moon point of the Saturn-Uranus cycle here, so the very culmination of the first half, we have what's called the Bitcoin white paper, which is essentially, like a 20-page document that has all the explanation and code that powers the Bitcoin protocol. And this was mysteriously released by a figure known as Satoshi Nakamoto. No one knows the actual identity of this person or persons, but it released this protocol in 2008, and in 2009, the very first Bitcoin was produced. And that first block of information was called the Genesis block. And attached to it was this message, just a simple reference to this article in the Times of London, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. Bitcoin is an invention that is meant to counteract this banking cartel, where the big guys get all the wealth and the rest of us get a pittance. Furthering my research, I came to understand that there are some Aquarian visionaries in the field. We have, and what I've done here is determine the angle between Saturn and Uranus at the birth of each person. My own Saturn-Uranus phase angle, we'll call it, is 69. Now, having that information opens a door for me, especially with the Sabian symbols, into what is the Sabian symbol for the 69th. What is the 69th Sabian symbol? That gives me a symbolic access to this Saturn-Uranus cycle as a whole. The same for Max Kaiser and Michael Saylor and Jeff Berwick. These three men are pillars in the Bitcoin community, and we'll be hearing a little bit from them shortly. We also see that Timothy May, the crypto anarchist manifesto fellow, is right up there at 90 degrees. Very significant positioning. Associated with this particular line of research is what I call the anaretic, or is known as the anaretic degrees of the zodiac. Now, these are simply the first and the last degree of a given zodiacal sign. Planets or luminaries found at anaretic degrees indicate the presence of seed harvests of energy and information accessible in the anaretic moment. The anaretic moment is a moment of indefinite duration, experienced as a subjective plenitude of being, wherein the powerful presence of a seed harvest specific to our particular nativity captures our attention. If, in that moment, we choose to adjust our behavior in alignment with what is essentially a cosmic download of energy and information, we will be fortunate enough to come into balanced reception of what is essentially a celestial gift. My understanding of Taurus anaretic, which is what I have, has come through working with my own birth chart, which places asteroid Pallas Athena at Taurus 30, the same degree signifying the start of the 42 to 88 Saturn-Uranus cycle. Exploring this placement has made me particularly resonant with the inner dynamics of Saturn-Uranus cycles in general. What follows are some of the results. So here we go. We have this span of the cycle, the major turning points, and we're at a major turning point here and now, 2021. The main keyword, reorientation. Sabian symbols and Bitcoin pioneers. So we're going back to Timothy May, who, as I indicated, in 1988, initiated this whole cryptography vector, and which led to the development of a currency available through Bitcoin. Well, Mr. May has Sun anaretic Sagittarius. This is the final degree of the Sagittarius. I would call that a very visionary point. And Redlina, we have another person waiting to get in, please.
So many names there now that they don't even appear at the top. Thanks for alerting me, Dwayne.
You're welcome. Thank you. Mr. May has this to say about crypto. And crypto anarchy will alter completely the nature of government regulation, the ability to tax and control economic interactions, the ability to keep information secret, and will even alter the nature of trust and reputation. So that's the word from a visionary crypto anarchist back in 1988. Now his sun, located at Sagittarius 30, the Sabian symbol is the Pope. And as Mr. Burgess has eloquently indicated, this symbol refers to living as a symbol. At high levels of leadership, we become the embodiment of an ideal, losing the right to excessive displays of emotion or individuality. Society today is based on the principle that any particular group consciousness is held by an individual representative. For the Roman Church, it is the Pope. For the USA, the President. These are people, and yet they are asked to embody transpersonal ideas and qualities. Sometimes we too are placed in central positions as spokespersons, whose task is to speak for the group within which, for a while, we have found ourselves to be the most influential factor. It is a great challenge. Now, Mr. Michael Saylor has had a huge impact in the world of Bitcoin and related cryptocurrencies. He was born with Sun at Aquarius 16 degrees, right next to my own Sun at 15. I felt an immediate resonance with him, and that has proven out over time. A very interesting fellow, and we'll be hearing from him shortly. When you have the Sun at Aquarius 16, the symbol that comes up, and here we're going to Rudyard's indication, Sabian symbol interpretations, a big businessman at his desk. And this is, I mean, to come across Michael Saylor and realize that he has this incredible resonance with this particular sun symbol, it was just a really empowering realization for me. The keynote, the ability to organize the many aspects of an enterprise involving a large group of human beings. This is the first stage in the 64th fivefold subcycle. It introduces the concept of management, which is basic at this period of the cyclic process, which the zodiac symbolizes, yet which needs to be totally re-evaluated if mankind is to actualize the spiritual potentialities implied in the evolutionary transformation just ahead. Organization should be the key word, rather than mere organization. For humanity now can and should realize that it is indeed an organism. Mr. Saylor is the CEO of MicroStrategy. He's written a book, Mobile Wave, How Mobile Intelligence Will Change Everything. He, in 2008, set up Saylor.org, which are free online courses open to anyone on the planet. You can get certification, often leading to further education, more institutional education. But I think that's a really wonderful Aquarian-oriented kind of gift that he's put out in the world. He has the Venus anaretic in Capricorn. So another really powerful Sabian symbol resonance here. So Venus anaretic at Capricorn 30, the Sabian symbol, a secret meeting of men responsible for executive decisions in world affairs. Keynote, the power to assume responsibility for crucial choices arrived after mature discussions with those who share this power, executive power. We're used to powerful executives gathering like we have in the image below, right? It's a lot of rich and powerful men gathered in cloistered, in meetings that no one else has access to, and they make all the big decisions. Well, that's changing. And Michael Saylor is one of the foremost disturbers in the field. Since January 1st of this year, his company has invested $2.5 billion into Bitcoin. And this has sent shockwaves through the financial community worldwide. This is giving Bitcoin a much higher profile. And his company, MicroStrategy, has taken it the next step to educate other CEOs, especially, as to how they did this. I mean, there's a fairly complex procedure here to transfer from fiat currency into Bitcoin. But Michael and his company have released through a very recent, actually on the 3rd and 4th of February, Michael Saylor of Bitcoin, turned king of Bitcoin treasures, called upon fellow business executives to avoid the path of financial serfdom at his virtual World.Now Bitcoin themed conference. In his solo address, Saylor detailed the cryptocurrency playbook that propelled his 3-decade-old data firm to newfound relevance in less than a year, largely eschewing the near mystical rhetoric that has punctuated his public crypto musings since August. Saylor focused on hardline business strategies, procedures, and dollar-sense language in a calibrated appeal to corporations. This has precipitated, most obviously recently, the similar move by Elon Musk, who has also put $1.5 billion worth of fiat currency into Bitcoin. So these are major executives making huge decisions that are shaking up the financial institution worldwide. This is up on the internet now, freely available. You can go and watch the actual presentations that were given at this recent conference, all for free. Educating other executives on how to do it, how to make this journey from fiat into Bitcoin. Michael.
Give me an example of something you can own $100 million of, where you can take personal custody of it, and where you can actually move it anywhere on Earth, and where even if I hold a gun to your head, I can't take it from you. And the only thing we've ever figured out that you can do that with is Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin is like, it keeps everybody honest. The optionality to do this means that all you've got to do is find one bank in Singapore that'll treat you better than the bank in New York or London or Tokyo, and then you can move it in a half an hour for $5. And what happens next? The bank in New York thinks, well, I guess we can't screw these guys over, because they'll just move it to Singapore. And the guys in California say, well, I can't just tax all the Bitcoin in California. It'll move to Wyoming. It'll move to Singapore. It'll move to Malta. And at the end of the day, you can tell everybody to go fuck themselves. You can put it in your head, memorize the freaking key, right? And it's here. And then, you know, the classic Bitcoiner response is, oh, yeah, my Bitcoin, I lost it in a boating accident. Ever heard that phrase? It's kind of a trope, but what it means is, at the end of the day, if you push me too far, I lost it. It's gone. Sorry. Tax that. Look, I think Bitcoin's a bank in cyberspace. It's, you know, and your choices are you save your money in a traditional, conventional fiat bank, and you're going to watch your purchasing power dwindle down over the next decade to the point where it'll buy nothing. Or you can gamble in the stock market that's maybe rigged against you, you know, and if it's not rigged against you, then you'll be buying companies that are generating cash flows and fiat currency that is collapsing in value. So even if you think you've avoided the problem of currency weakening, of storing your money in a bank, you haven't really, because if you're buying real estate, bonds, or stocks that also generate fiat currency, and that currency is collapsing in value, you've got the same problem. Now you have a fiat derivative. Or you can save your monetary energy, save your purchasing power and your wealth in Bitcoin, which is not a fiat derivative, that is not collapsing in value, that is going to appreciate against all these other currencies as they collapse in value. And you don't have to gamble on whether or not Apple will ship a good iPhone 14, or, you know, the next generation of this product or that product or this service, or what that government will do to this company and what that CEO will do. All very complicated, anxiety inducing. Bitcoin is a simple thing, right? You're buying into a thermodynamically sound, workable monetary network in the history of the world. First digital monetary network. You know, it's a gift. Once in 1,000 years, do you actually see the invention? This is our once in 1,000 year opportunity. You get to buy into it early. 10% of all the electricity that was ever going to be pumped. Or what if you could buy 1% of all the that's ever going to be pumped, right? That's what this is, right? It's 1% of all the fire that's ever going. You have a chance to buy a percentage of the future. Seems like a no-brainer.
For being the way you are and taking the moves that you're doing, because I know that you're probably facing opposition, but you know, for sticking true to yourself.
Yep. Thanks for hosting me, Austin.
Thanks so much, Michael. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Another major spokesman in the field is Max Kaiser, who we see has moon anaretic in the final degree of Scorpio. Max and his wife, Stacy, are educators in the field. They're multimillionaires now essentially through their early buy-in to Bitcoin. And they almost on a daily basis are educating people through their many media sources. So the Sabian symbol for Scorpio 30, a Halloween jester.
Scorpio 30, the Halloween jester. Now, for our community to function at all, we need to limit severely the animal nature. And yet, it is nature, it is powerful, and it is bigger than that which can be totally suppressed and limited. You just cannot repress the animal instinct within the self, certainly not the whole community. And so traditionally we have allowed certain things to occur a little bit, a tiny little bit. So at Christmas we're allowed to be licentious. We can be gluttonous and rather flirtatious at the office party, perhaps, and so on. That's okay at Christmas. And on All Fool's Day, the 1st of April, traditionally, people could mock the king and get away with it. And on Halloween, at Halloween, we're allowed to make fun of the dead. On the 1st of November, the day later, we perhaps often in certain countries anyway, we would remember the dead in sacredness, but the night before that, we become ghoulish and make ourselves almost cynical about death and so on. I don't think this mystery, 30th of Scorpio, is particularly related to Halloween. The particular message here is more the jester aspect. Now, the court's jester throughout history had a function in society to limit the tyranny of the king. When the king was just left to his own devices and advised by counselors, all of whom had political agendas and personal glory to fulfill, at that time when the king just couldn't get good advice, the court jester would perhaps ridicule the king at risk of his life. The jesters were often killed because they tried to reduce the power of the sovereign leader. And we have within the principle of the jester the idea of satire and ridicule and the use of laughter as a power device to diminish overblown authority. Now, it isn't only the king who has overblown authority. Each of us does. And the inner jester is the part of us that laughs at ourselves when we try and do something which is just inappropriate, when we're trying to actually make a claim that's wrong, that we have no right to claim, that we have no power to claim, that nobody else wants us to claim, when we're doing something which is well over the top, in that sense of taking authority inappropriately, then the inner voice within us, the jester within, is there, laughing at us and reducing our sense of ego, and trying to give us a better context. So that's one part of this mystery. Another part is this sense, also on a personal level, that we cannot and must not deny the animal instincts within us, the urges that we have to be licentious and gluttonous and not an acceptable part of the community. To some extent, all of us lives outside of the terms of reference set by civilization within. And many are obedient to the needs of the community and the laws and the moral codes and the religious teachings of the community. Many of us are pretty good, pretty obedient to them, not necessarily in a slavish way, but because we can understand the wisdom of that. And yet, that part of us that seeks to rebel against all of that must not be denied. There was a period in my own personal spiritual training, as it were, when I realized when I was drinking alcohol, I was not in conformity with my principles and my spiritual beliefs and so on. And so I gave up alcohol entirely, totally. And I was very proud of myself for being able to do that. And I did that for a long time, 17 years, I think. And then it came to my attention that I was as addicted to not alcohol as I had been to alcohol. And a more advanced level of being is where occasionally I let my hair down and I have a few drinks and behave in a silly way and get a bit embarrassed about it tomorrow morning. And I did then start to take a drink now and again, and generally let my hair down much more frequently in a much more relaxed way. And I saw that that was actually a spiritual lesson for me. The absence of disciplines is an important part of the whole question of discipline. And here we can look at the tradition in Christianity throughout the hundreds of years, where they had a tradition of fasting and feasting. There were a lot of feast days. All of these things you see in your diary sometime, the Feast of St. Stephen's and the Feast of St. Jacob or whatever, they were real feasts. These monks, they used to stuff their faces with meats and piles of vegetables and drinking mead. They'd have a party, and it was really over the top in terms of gluttony. And these guys, well, Friar Tuck is portrayed as a very fat man because of this thing that they did. They were wealthy, and yet they also fasted between the feasts. And the ability to do both of those things, to fast and to feast, neither one of them is really okay as a way of life without the other. If you're going to go to one extreme, you do need to balance it with the other extreme. And so those of us who are actually very disciplined and we hold down great responsibilities for our family and our work and other aspects of society, those of us that are very disciplined and controlled and so on and so forth, unless we let our hair down sometimes, we're going to find that we pay a very severe price, because the animal nature within us is powerful and it wants to be uncontrolled. It wants passion to express, regardless of the implications. That's what passion is. Passion doesn't care about the cost of doing something. It's total emotion. No rational thought goes behind passion. So those of us who do not know how to let our hair down, we don't know passion. And if we cannot relax our disciplines, then we cannot gain access to the most passionate, powerful, therefore, natural energy within us. And when we are passionate, this energy is unlike anything else. We know things, we do things, we feel things, otherwise we just wouldn't have access to. And these very often are the special things, the things that we remember, they're outstanding, our passions. Our passions define us, equally as much as our disciplines and our routines. And so I think this degree, Scorpio 30, the Halloween Jester, is just recognizing the fact that society cannot repress its civilians' feelings, and equally we cannot repress our deeper, perhaps darker aspects of being, and we should not. We should channel it. We should channel it by expressing it at appropriate times. Now, this does not have to be marked by the calendar. This can be left to happen chance and appropriateness in terms of our normal lives. But there are times when we just have to do what we feel, whether or not we're allowed to, and just step outside of the box a little bit. And you'll find, I think, that when you do step outside of the box in terms of emotionality, you will equally step out of the box in terms of understandings. And there's this mystery of life that is not available to those who live in a disciplined way. It's only available to the passionate ones amongst us. When we're in the zone, we're passionate. And therefore, anything of passion is taking us somewhere in the zone of our spiritual heightened state of being, the soul's awareness of itself. Surely must be passionate. I think the soul is passionate. I think the soul is passion sometimes. And society has to allow it because it's bigger and deeper and more real than anything that we've come up with as a species to control it.
Max the Jester.
Wow. Yeah. Feeling it. Oh, that was a very short-lived dip, Stacy.
That's right. And you know what? I'm going to teach you some sign language here. Lessons from Bitcoin Meme Hub. Have. This is have. Have. Fun. F.
Fun.
S. Pour. Like this.
Pour.
Yep. Pour.
Pour.
So have fun saying pour. That's a good lesson for all of those people who were, like in the mainstream media, saying that the Bitcoin dream is dead, that Bitcoin is in a bear market, CNN called it, for 3 days. And a special have fun saying pour for Max's favorite, and everybody's hoping that they get a Christine Lagarde. Oh, Christine Lagarde! Oui! Je m'appelle Christine Lagarde, je suis français, et j'aime bien imprimer de l'argent, j'aime bien, j'imprime. Quand j'imprime l'argent pour la monde, j'ai expérience un petit orgasme, exactement. Jette, Christine, jette. Le sens de mon forme est formidable. Oh. Right. Christine Lagarde had H, F, S, P. Okay? H, F, S, P. So she should have fun saying pour. The audacity of her, in case you don't know, she's the head of the European Central Bank. And she said that Bitcoin there's funny business going on over there, which I'm going to bring up in our interview with Nick Carter, because it's quite interesting. He's been focusing on all these deplatformings going on and the censorship resistance of Bitcoin. And when she says funny business, the first thing I thought of was the fact that comedians were the first to start being deplatformed or attacked online for their jokes, which were not, social justice warrior acceptable. And, of course, Bitcoin is the place that will eventually, the second layers and third layers and all these auction houses and Sphinx chat sort of developments haven't yet but fully developed. But one day this will be the safe space for censorship resistance speech.
Right. It's remarkable. So she comes out and not only saying that Bitcoin is, funny business, which is a very weak attempt to describe what's going on with Bitcoin. So she's clearly very, very, very late into kind of figuring out what's going on here. But she says we need to bring in global regulation, right? So this is really egomaniacal poppycock. This French woman who runs the ECB, which is a dying institution in itself. And I predicted already on another show that the ECB will be the first major global central bank to go bust in 2021. They will recapitalize it. They won't call it a bust. They'll call it something different, like a reset, but it'll go bust. That she has the gall, to use a French word, to suggest that she's going to impose global regulation. And of course, what's happening in other countries that are outside the influence of these bureaucrats and nincompoops is that they're madly buying and mining Bitcoin because they realize that these bureaucrats and central bankers have gone way, way, way round the bend, and they need to protect themselves now. So, I mean, this is, on one hand, it's disgusting and appalling, but on the other hand, it's great because the Bitcoin attracts these critics and foes, and we're moving up the global ladder, right? It used to be with that, it was against like tech guys were fighting tech guys, and then tech guys are fighting bankers, and then money managers were fighting bankers. And we had Peter Schiff, you know, he got into the ring and he started boxing against Bitcoin, and he's been losing every round for 10 years. And then we got Nouriel Roubini and Paul Krugman. Okay, they're kind of regional, they're US based. But now we got the global characters, right? Like Christine Lagarde. There's only a few people after Christine Lagarde until its game is completely and entirely over. She's kind of like one of the last pins to drop.
I also wanted to say, as we're at the top of the show right now, this episode is brought to you by swanbitcoin.com/Stacy. Yes, you can see that in our wide shot over here. The swan is sitting there, taking care of all. We've been smash buying. We got to smash buy. I smash bought quite a lot when it was fell below 40,000, and CNN was shouting that it was a bear market. And I think it was the New York Times said the Bitcoin dream is over. So I was smash buying then. And of course, for any of the newbies in the Orange Pill Podcast Telegram group, you know, it's quite, you know, your first huge drop in Bitcoin, and it was down something like 28% at its low. You know, it's quite unnerving, but that's what the Orange Pill Podcast Telegram group is for, is to, you know, there's a lot of people in there who have already endured like 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 of these spectacular drops.
C'est vrai, Swan. Et est-ce que tu parles comme ça un petit peu? Oui, je m'appelle Swanee. Et Christine Lagarde, elle est cool. Elle est cool. What? Swanee, that's rude. Don't say that about Christine. I'm putting you back away.
So I also want to point out regarding Christine Lagarde, who used the public airwaves in order to say that Bitcoin has a lot of funny business going on. And she in particular said that, I think she used kind of a word that it was reprehensible. She said Bitcoin is reprehensible and it allows money laundering. So Christine Lagarde is the head of the ECB. Just understand that she is a regulator for European banks. So I want to show you a headline from this week alone about a European bank. In fact, the largest of European banks. Well, I mean, it's crashed so much, I don't know if it's still the largest, but Deutsche Bank agrees to pay $130 million in latest major U.S. penalty to resolve an investigation into a foreign bribery scheme. The German lender entered a deferred prosecution agreement, a common way for big banks to avoid criminal charges. Of course, Bitcoiners are not allowed to avoid criminal charges. We had Charlie Shrem go to prison. We had Ross Ulbricht sentenced to 2.5 lifetimes in prison. So, you know, here we have these people, these banks under the supervision of Christine Lagarde are bribing foreign officials. If you try to do that, whether you use euros, dollars, or Bitcoin, you will go to prison for several lifetimes. If you get caught in America, maybe in Europe, you might get 7 years. But the fact is that here she is pointing fingers, and yet, you know, she's casting the first stone, literally. Like, she's the one that should be looking at herself.
Another major figure in the Bitcoin world, and we have Neptune anaretic at the first degree of Sagittarius. So Jeff is a figure who initiates large gatherings of people around Bitcoin and related, and is educating them through that. He's an ex-Canadian living in Mexico, known as the Dollar Vigilante. And his annual event is called Anarcapulco in Acapulco, Mexico. Definitely a major visionary in the field and very active. Recently released this book, Controlled Demolition of the American Empire, from the Federal Reserve on up. This virtual festival or event just happened. I attended part of it. It was all free, very innovative, leading edge technology being deployed to educate people. And Jeff's idea of anarchy is, it's not that there are no rules, it's that there are no rulers. He's an anarchist, anarcho-capitalist from that point of view. He's in the last year has started doing almost daily podcasts like this, where he goes for a walk with his little dog Lucy. And I'm going to give the last word to Jeff here.
A lot of people are like, the only way to survive this is through Jesus or that sort of a thing. And in general, they're right. This is a very spiritual war. And this is something I've talked about for years. You have to get yourself straight right now. First, physically, because if you're not physically well, forget about everything else. Then mentally, get all the programming out of your head. That takes years. I'm meditating minimum 3 hours a day right now. And just getting programming out of my head, looking at all the programming, all the issues, all the past traumas, get those all fixed. And then you can start to really connect on a spiritual level. And once you do that, I think that's the real answer. But on the physical level of you being here on Earth right now, it's still not a bad idea to protect yourself so that you don't get killed by the mobs, you don't get put in FEMA camps, and you have enough capital that you have some options. And all those things are pretty important, unless you want to become basically like Gandhi or something and own nothing and basically live that way, which is totally fine in my opinion. It's not a bad thing. I think if you really attain sort of a level of enlightenment or a connection to the universe or God or whatever you want to call it, I don't think anything could be better than that, really. But most people aren't going to get there. And if you haven't even started yet, you're not going to get there anytime soon. So you might as well start working on yourself in every way.
And there you have it. And there's our chart for the current moment as centered on the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan, Mexico. And right off the bat, I see the sun at Aquarius, 30 degrees, Aquarius anaretic. Very special day indeed. So enough said by me. I would like to invite Mr. Burgess to initiate a commentary on the chart for that we see in front of us. We can leave that up, or if there's an alternative needed, we can do that too. So is that okay with you, James? Is James still with us? And you're muted, Redlina.
Yes. We would.
Unmuted now. If you would want to focus on some of the chart, I mean, there are so many issues here. There's so many points that you've underlined. I take a different approach to the Saturn square Uranus. I don't really think that any particular day is necessarily symbolic of the energy of the cycle of Saturn and Uranus that we're studying. Certain points are for sure, and I think the 30th degree of Aquarius is the point that I'm mainly interested in focusing on. So if you're happy for me to just talk a little bit about that degree.
Absolutely.
I can do. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to address them. I mean, first of all, it's interesting that the basic Uranus-Saturn cycle is described by an astrologer, Paladin Jenkins, as cutting away from the past, changing track, rules broken or changed, rising to the situation. And this whole thing that we can see repeated in all of the main points in the last 2 cycles that I've studied of Saturn-Uranus is focused on, well, I've identified 3 different aspects which are interconnected. The one that you're focusing on mainly today, the financial aspect, I think is a very important part of it. I think we also need to look at the implication of what we're doing with the Bitcoin kind of awareness, is that we're challenging tyranny. So there were times in the past when this cycle was represented by the challenge of the common people against tyrants, rather than as in a financial way, in a different way. So I've more focused on that sense of seeing the past as being representative of the power of tyrants, and the future as being representative of the power of the people. And this is the struggle that we're going through. And if we remember the relationship between Uranus and Kronos in mythological terms, Uranus was the sky god who kept on giving Gaia, his wife, lots of babies. And then he was unsatisfied with them, dissatisfied, and he ate them. And she gave him a stone to eat instead of giving him her son Kronos, who is Saturn. And Saturn grew up to take the tyrant down. So Saturn killed Uranus. And this cycle of one tyrant being put down such that the next comes along and becomes a tyrant is the Uranus-Saturn mythological cycle. So a part of me is a bit cautious about accepting anything as a permanent end to this cycle. So whereas I think financial power is changing in a bigger, I like that comment that guy said, that once in 1,000 years something major happens and this is it. I think that was a very impressive comment, because money has actually originated in the form of solid things, coin, and then ever so recently it became paper, only a couple of 300 years ago, and then it became electronic in a very short period of time. So the whole substance of money has moved very, very quickly, underlining the tremendous speed of change that we're going through. When I looked at the 2 cycles ago in 1942, just to kind of get a prequel, shall we say, of the cycle we're studying now, we have an interesting phenomenon where the conjunction at that time is exactly square, this 30-degree Aquarius thing, which was present in 1988. I find that interesting. And in 1942, we had a peacock on an ancient lawn for the Sabian symbol. Now, the ancient lawn represents the status quo, the past power. In those days, it was the British Empire being brought down. It was also the case that, interestingly again, Hitler began his rise to power on the idea that the Jewish bankers were controlling the world. And this is a very clear echo in what we're discussing today. So strangely, even though Hitler has been well, he went mad, and we've taken him as being all evil. Nevertheless, at the beginning of his rise to power, he was trying to reduce the perceived evil of the people who controlled the money. And the peacock energy at that time was evidenced by glamour. The Nazi party was very glamorous. And on the other side of the world, we had Mahatma Gandhi also being rather glamorous in a totally different way, dressing down rather than dressing up, in order to bring down the financial masters that was the British Empire. So we've got 1942 as a really clear indicator of the attempts to bring down the power possessors. Now, the power possessors normally use money, and Dwayne has focused on the potential answer that Bitcoin is to end the hegemony of the bankers by changing their money system. However, there's an underlying energy which also interests me, and that's the general principle of trying to bring down the tyrants, however you may do that. And there are two other ways that I identified as being consistent with the positions of these various points of the cycle of Saturn and Uranus. One of which is power sharing itself and democratic processes. So in 1942, we had an attempt to bring down imperialism, the British Empire, by Gandhi. And now we have India and Pakistan as a result of that, constantly at war or potential war with each other in a nuclear sense. So that's the current position of that challenge to authority. We have Hitler trying to bring down the Jewish bankers, and then the communists trying to bring down Hitler. None of those actually winning, and in the end, the USA won that battle of how to control the world, and they controlled it using money. And FDR, Roosevelt, he actually introduced this New Deal, which was basically revitalizing capitalism. And that gave rise to the wealth that was celebrated in the 60s on the opposition of the Saturn-Uranus cycle, because everybody in the 60s were unexpectedly rich. There was no wealth in the world really until the 60s. And at that time, the people who had the money to spend were actually kids, and they were spending it on sex and drugs and rock and roll. So then the battle was going on between what was the, shall we say, recreational and consciousness application of drugs on the one hand, which was like the summer of love people, the hippies, and on the other hand, the birth of the cartels in South America, Mexico, and so on, which eventually was the winner of that battle. So I think we can see different battles over the period of time being fought on the level of both finance and power distribution. But another one also arises, which I'm mostly interested in, and that is the development of consciousness. Because one of the things which is really clear and not much spoken about is that in 1942, for sure, there was a huge awakening of humanity's consciousness in the form of the writers from the existentialist movement and the Beat generation, and generally people woke up because they were at war and they realized what was important. And this was repeated in the 60s, obviously, the birth of all sorts of the modern era of consciousness. But it also took place in the 1988 conjunction in a big way. I can remember that period very clearly. And there was nothing like it in my whole life for that 3 or 4 year period. And at that time, Uranus was out of bounds. I'm not sure if people understand that phrase particularly well, but if a planet is out of bounds, it's a long way away from the ecliptic. It's further out than it should go, shall we say. And when Uranus, of all planets, is out of bounds, it just goes absolutely wild and crazy. And I was in that period. I was right at the right age with the right group of people. And we were just manifesting magical phenomena all over the place. The prequel to that was the harmonic convergence in 1987. And so I think this is also a part of the Uranus-Saturn cycle, this vibration of the awakening of consciousness. So I'm rather hopeful that this Saturn square that we're experiencing this year and today in particular actually heralds another burst of awakening in terms of people just understanding what's going on. And we can see evidence that this might be happening because we've got the pandemic forcing people inward. They're forcing people to turn within, hidden within their own homes, but also within their own self. You know, if you actually live with a family and you've got a load of kids and a spouse, you're going to be hiding away in your own sense of inner self. And I think this is happening. A lot of people are getting more philosophical and understanding the way the world is turning. So I see this this square as being indicative of the consciousness that's giving rise to a challenge towards the power possessors using Bitcoin. But I'm expecting there to be other phenomena, not only the financial markets, but such things as music and art and way of relating to people. You know, these kind of soft things that are never recorded in the history books that we find much more difficult to study because we can't research them. But I'm hopeful that that is what we're looking for. Now, in that sense, the 20th degree of Aquarius, sorry. Did somebody want to speak then?
No, I'm sorry. It's some noise from the background. I think it's sorted now.
You can answer it later.
So the 30th degree of Aquarius, which is what mostly interests me in this chart, is called the field of Ardath in bloom. Now, this field of Ardath is almost like a mythical concept that comes from the time of Babylon. We're going back to the birth of civilization, really. And they had this idea of there being a spiritual field, in other words, a reality, no less real than physical reality, but non-physical. And the people could just tune into and relate to each other on that level. So I'm rather hopeful that that's the kind of energy that's going to be stimulated at these times. Shall I stop there and see if there's anybody who wants to make comment or questions?
Yes, everyone's welcome if you guys want to.
Thank you for that.
Very much.
Yeah, I just asked a question in the chat.
Yes, go ahead.
So you would normally expect that Uranus in Taurus would be not as strong as Saturn in Aquarius, or do you see that differently?
Well, it's two different planets doing two different jobs. I mean, Uranus is stronger doing Uranus work and Saturn is stronger doing Saturn work, whichever zodiac sign they're in. So if you're focusing, if your question is about a Saturn phenomenon, then you look at Saturn's position. But I don't think we can measure two planets as being stronger than each other or weaker than each other. It depends where you put your consciousness, and that will depend upon your own horoscope, probably.
That affects the whole theory of rulership and exaltation, etc.
Well, I don't consider myself a traditional astrologer.
Okay.
Some of these ideas are very useful when you're studying certain aspects of consciousness, but astrology is universal. So if you're interested in worldly things, then you would do Vedic astrology. If it's in psychological things, you would do Western astrology. If it's in prognostication, you would do horary astrology. So astrology is a tool that you can use in order to awaken your consciousness or your intuitive and side to understand things. So if for you it's important to know which is the most powerful energy, I would then say that Uranus is always going to be more powerful than Saturn because it's an outer planet. but that's only true for people that are awakened to the outer planets. You know, I live with two parents that both went through their Pluto square Plutos without doing anything differently. They didn't change their routines for one moment. They had no interest in the outer planets, you know. And yet I see some people that
maybe we should look at planets having a different role in different signs and not be too focused on these +5 and +4 and minus something. Yeah.
Well, I agree. I really do. I think
Yeah.
astrology is a tool, not a slave driver. I'm not bound by what other people have said, and I don't think any of us should be.
Yeah.
It's an intuitive skill. Astrology. If astrology was a science, then we'd all be millionaires. You know, I don't know any millionaire astrologers, so it's not really a science. It's an art. You know, it's to awaken our intuition, and our intuition can be excellent or it can be very poor. Depends upon the day of, you know, or the day itself as well as the person. I don't see astrology as deterministic. That might be an unpopular point of view, but that's where I come from, you know.
I'm with you.
Sorry, Radlina?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just trying to mention that in this group, we're having the same view in general. So
Very, very good.
happy to be on the same track on this regard.
Good, good. Pleased to hear that.
James, can I just say that I thought what you suggested was very promising, to think of you know, the development of consciousness, and of course, and for me that in terms of also the role of Uranus in that sense, with Saturn, and thinking of the, well, this myth of the Aquarian age, you know, having been brought up in the 60s and remembering Hair, you know, the musical, and waiting for the Aquarian age to arrive, and somehow, you know, the development of consciousness sounds, yeah, you know, I can.
Well, can I give you a metaphorical example? Are you familiar with terms like Beltane? Do you know the word Beltane?
Just remind me, I have heard it. Beltane, is that the ritual? Or what?
Yeah, it's a time of year where when there is a ritual. It's halfway between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. It's around the 1st of May.
Yeah.
But the thing is that if you said it was the 1st of May, or if you said it was the 15th degree of Taurus, you'd be wrong, because Beltane occurs a few days later on a north-facing slope than it does on a south-facing slope.
Right.
It's where you are in nature. Beltane is the May blossom. That's how pagans would have celebrated it. So where you are and what you're doing and which garden you're in changes the timing of Beltane. Well, I think that's true for the Aquarius age.
Right.
I think some people, like Galileo, was into the Aquarius age first by inventing telescopes and seeing Uranus for the first time. Whereas there's quite a lot of people that I know that are not in the Aquarius age yet. Some people saw the moon landing as the Aquarius age beginning. Some people might see today, you know, but it's all your own choice. We can't measure it scientifically, so that it comes down to your own decision about which point of view to trust. And that comes down to an intuitive decision. I think if we go more deterministic than that, we're going to make fools of ourselves as astrologers, really.
Definitely. Not trying to do that at all. I think maybe even the contrary, and exploring it from so many different perspectives. For example, we were discussing with Dwayne before we started today that he said to me in the half an hour before we started that he's planning on using this format of the charts that is very unusual for what I, for example, usually use. This is everything starting from 0 degrees Aries. How is it called, Dwayne? The natural zodiac chart, isn't it?
Yes.
And it turned out that I had looked at a completely different format. And we came to this conclusion that it doesn't really matter because we are free to explore any format, any system, as long as this speaks to us in some way. And
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly so. That's exactly the point. Astrology awakens intuition. And if you can find a way with it that works for you, then that's your way. And that's what we're doing to an extent with Sabian symbols. And other people have come up with many, many complex versions of astrology. And if it works for them, then it works.
Yes, what we have really loved in this group is that very often ideas, especially for new topics and new conversations for the future, have arisen from the current conversation somehow. There have been coincidences like this during the times we were speaking before, and sometimes we use the chart of the day as just as a prompt for that. Not because we want to focus on this moment exactly. That I agree with you, Mr. Burgess, that maybe especially with very slow planets like Saturn and Uranus, it's not just about one day, isn't it? It's a whole process of the conjunction. And it takes days and weeks and months. But when we look at that chart, maybe we can find other things, other coincidences. Like, for example, I thought Dwayne had prepared to give us the Sabian symbols for the position of Uranus and the position of Saturn today, because I think we can probably explore this all together a little bit to see how some keywords of those two symbols are so relevant, very interestingly, not just to the planets, but also to the signs they are in at the moment. And maybe that would answer Bob's question a little bit.
Radlina, I was going to mention the Sabian symbols and how relevant they are right now to what we've just said. And can I do that? Just say that 8 degrees of Aquarius, the Dane Rudger was beautifully gowned war figures, but the part of it that I felt so relevant was the term he used of exemplars, archetypes of a new culture. And I feel that that's so relevant. And at 8 degrees Taurus, talked about a sleigh on land, uncovered yet by snow. So anticipating and preparing. And the words that I think are so relevant are future-oriented imagination. And so those two together seem to bring forward what both James and Dwayne have presented as well.
Exactly.
I think also there's an aspect of creativity as well to both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
I think this is a very important thing. Yeah, in both cases, we're actually having to make up our ideas about what they mean. A sleigh without any snow. How do you use a sleigh without any snow? Well, you have to make up a way to do that. And the wax figures are designed in order to imagine, we imagine what we would be looking like in that gown. So it's all about creating out of our imagination.
Yes, I have a question for you. For example, about Aquarius 8. There is another keyword, new collective developments and new forms revealed. And the keyword forms in regards to Saturn, but the whole symbol is talking about new forms, new developments. So currently Saturn in Aquarius. And I continue always to be amazed how, when looking at the birth chart of a person or something in particular like today's chart, there always is some mysterious relationship between the Sabian symbol picture that the situation the symbol describes and the context, like, for example, the house in which the planet is located in the person's chart somehow speaks on the same topic. Or here we have Aquarius 8, which is the Saturn position at the moment, not of any other planet, but particularly of Saturn. And the symbol is revealing things about forms and new forms. Well, at the same time, the Taurus 8, where today we have not just Uranus, but also the moon, exactly in the same degree. I think that's probably special in one way or another, or at least to me personally, that it happens to be not just in Taurus, but also on the same degree as Uranus. I was like prompting us to pay more attention to that degree. And there is something like preparation for the future.
Could be that the people
Yes, I agree. I
in
think a
general
moon
will be
conjunction
more
is very-
involved in this. Sorry.
Can I just say something for a minute?
Yes, yes, go ahead.
I noticed, I mean, I don't know if it was mentioned before, but there's a mutable Grand Cross in there. And it's involving Neptune, Vesta, the North Node. What's the other one? Oh, yeah. And Juno up on top. Because it's all the middle degrees, 19 degrees to 18. And then you got 16 with the Gemini here. So it's all mutable. It's like either we change or we die is, I mean, I don't know. It's like, we have to change. Otherwise we can't have the future. It's inevitable. That's it. Oh, damn it. There we go.
Just we interrupted you a little bit earlier, so you can go on now if you wish.
Oh, you want me? Oh, okay. Also, I was wondering, I mean, this is for the linguist here in the group. If you notice the Sabian symbols, the prefix of it is saber. In Spanish, it means to know. So yeah. he really picked a nice term there for us. And that's about all I have right now. So you can go back.
Thinking about the same thing right in the beginning, Niels. Thank you so much for pointing that out.
Okay, you're welcome.
Okay, I was trying to say to Mr. Burgess that you can go on as well from earlier.
What is it I'm talking about now? I've kind of said what I expected
that
to say.
We interrupted you earlier, so I was just trying to give you the word again.
One of the processes that I went through was to think, what is the cycle itself about? And I was moving forward and saying that it seems to be a mixture of the financial and political and social organization of consciousness. And we do know that there's always going to be tension because the principle of Saturn and the principle of Uranus are fundamentally at cross purposes. Mythologically, they both want to kill each other, you know, and I think that in our imagination, Saturn limits freedom and Uranus expands freedom. I think of Uranus as electricity, and I apply that idea of electricity to the mental processes. So I would see Uranus as the higher mind, the mind of God, divine intelligence, and Saturn being the attempt to give form to that which will be eternally formless in the end. It's our attempt to hold something in momentary fixity, which actually can never be held for very long. So Saturn, in a sense, will always be thwarted. Uranus will always break Saturn's structures. And so what we're experiencing, most particularly through a square, is that tension. On the world stage, it's really obvious. The world is at cross purposes in a very obvious way, more than I can remember since the end of the Cold War. In fact, many years before that. You know, we're going back before the beginning of the cycle in 1988. So what happens when you have two strong energies in conflict with each other is that you're certain to have to experience the conflict and to have a resolution of the conflict. And like I said, one of the things that's actually being tested now is the relationship between tyranny and democracy. And we've only very recently come out of a situation in America, in the White House no less, where democracy was in question, whether there is a democracy in America. If Trump had actually taken back the White House, having been voted out, that would be the end of democracy. And we came that close. At least people imagined that would perhaps be the threat of democracy in the country that represents that principle. but we didn't go there. We've saved the day, as it were. So I think what we have to do now is to learn how to manage this change that's occurring, where the right-wing forces of tyranny and the more left-wing force of democracy and people power, that has to be managed. Neither can win. I think it would be foolish for us to think that either Saturn or Uranus can win. That I don't actually think that the Earth is the place to experience peace. I know that might sound controversial, but I think there must be a place in the cosmic sense of the world where disharmony exists, where the darkness is allowed free reign. I think there must exist that, otherwise the cosmic balance would be upset. And if the Earth is that place, if this is the place where we're holding conflict, then our job is actually to hold conflict with consciousness, as Dwayne said. And rather than try and solve the issue permanently, we just have to address the fact that we're in relationship constantly with conflict. That's the nature of life while we're here on Earth. We are in conflict, and there's nothing we can do to finish that. All we have to do is to just surf on that, to dance around that, and to know that we're never going to lose and we're never going to win. It's not that kind of dance. If it were that kind of dance, then it would end. But it's not. It's an eternal dance. There must be conflict. And this is the planet of conflict, I would suggest. And therefore, I'm here in order to experience what inner conflict I have. And I do that by looking at the world, and I'm noticing that some people are deeply conflicted about Trump and democracy. Some are deeply conflicted about coronavirus. I personally am worried whether or not I'm going to be able to plant my rhubarb before the frost takes it. You know, that's where my reality is. The conflict about rhubarb, that's a vegetable. I don't know if you know the name. Do you see what I'm saying? That you choose where to have this battle. And if some people want to take on the White House and see if they can storm the White House, and others of us wants to make sure we keep the slugs away from our rhubarb, it's up to you where you choose to have your conflict. I choose to have my conflict with slugs and try not to get them eat my fruit, you know, and vegetables. Whereas other people are enforcing me to have this idea that there are lizards and there are spiritors and there are people with guns coming at me. And it's just like, well, no, there's not. That's in the world that you live in, and I don't live in that world. So this Saturn and Uranus cycle is just a personal thing, after all, even though it's cosmic, even though it's worldly. At the end of the game, my perception of it is my business, and I'm experiencing it now. You know, I'm saying to a group of people, a Uranus group of people, Uranus group of people, no, I have this position, and I'm happy to hold on to it in a Saturnine way, you know. So my conflict is whether or not you agree with me, and if you don't, I don't mind, and if you do, I'm you know, it's not going to change anything. So we get to choose where we have our conflicts, you know. Have I upset anybody by saying that?
No, not at all. We cannot be that easily upset.
I love what you're saying. I think it's I mean, I resonate with it. This is Lauren. I resonate with it and think it's very true. Every day we have different challenges, and we have the free will of where we put our perspective, our point of view. And that's part of our freedom, is a consciousness freedom of deciding how we are going to anchor ourselves towards no matter what happens. Like in the I Ching, I always think about the symbol about the master who doesn't drop the ceremonial spoon when there's some sort of explosion, you know, that can be our job. So thank you. I really love that.
Thank you.
When I didn't expect you're going to remove the chart as I
Oh,
want.
sorry.
No, it's fine. I would point out to what I wanted to show you all. I would be very interested to hear you all, and especially you, Mr. Burgess. What do you think about the idea of possibly using Chiron as this transition point of adjusting our choice of whether we would be more concentrated on the Uranian topics or on the Saturnian topics in our personal life? Can we use Chiron as this transition body between the two planets? That I was so intuitively attracted to looking into it today, because I didn't want to prepare any presentations, but just to look at something that may be interesting in the chart of the day. And what focused my attention was this exact sextile that Chiron is making to Saturn and semi-sextile to Uranus. I don't know how much of importance you make out of all of this, but I think it's probably significant because I see it really as a bridge between the two planets. And maybe if we look at our own personal charts where we have Chiron, this could be our key to the strategy of balancing this constant battle between the two forces. Maybe, just a suggestion.
That's lovely. That's really lovely to notice that. I prefer sextiles to any aspect personally. And Chiron at the 7th degree of Aries is the man expressing himself in two realms at once.
Exactly.
I mean,
I
how
checked
much
that
more
and I
coincidence?
Yes. Yes,
Living
it's just
both sides. I mean, the argument is that Chiron wants, in Aries 7, it wants to live both sides of each situation. So it isn't either Saturn or Uranus. It's how do we actually embrace both of them?
Is it not also related to self-definition, that symbol? I think it is a square lit on one side or something like this. And when I read a square lit on one side, this totally resonates with the square between Saturn and Uranus at the moment. And also this idea of choosing your way, self-defining in a way that out of this global crisis, a global situation, which is more general, not that personal, how to make it personal. And maybe Chiron is the one that points to that idea, to think about how we can make it personal.
Yeah, I mean, you're describing Aries 6 there.
Mm-hmm.
So I would suggest that the way in which we realize Aries 7 is by finding the wisdom of Aries 6. This is what I've noticed. I don't know whether we've ever discussed it, but can I just say that if you look backwards through the whole of the 360 degrees, I did a little thing on this. Let me read it out to you. I hope I can find it. There it is. If you ask yourself the question, Aries 1, how do we become the essence seed of your soul's incarnation? Answer Pisces 30. We become whatever we idealize. This is the great stone face.
Mm-hmm.
How do we become whatever we idealize? Answer 29 Pisces. By simultaneously looking for God and looking through God's eyes. That's the prism. And so you can go all the way back throughout 360 degrees going backwards. So if we apply that formula to what you've just said, if we see Aries 7 as the extension of possibilities, living in two realms at the same time, how do we recognize how to do that? How do we realize that? And it's Aries 6, a particular drive and focus. In other words, what you said, defining your identity, making your path really clear. That's how we come to realize the ability to expand our range of options. Because what happens when you get to a certain level of mastery? It's not that you only master one thing. You find that you can master whatever. Mastery is an inner condition. So as soon as you've actually realized the ability to know exactly who you are and you've applied your drive and your focus to one thing in Aries 6, then in Aries 7, you can do that wherever you put your attention. So if we want to know the answer to Chiron's position today, how do we embrace Saturn and Uranus at the same time? Answer, well, look at one of them first, understand Saturn, and then look at the other, understand Uranus, and you'll find that it's easier to actually understand the second when you've understood the first.
Right.
That would be my interpretation. it's what we do, isn't it? I mean, what we've got from Dwayne's presentation is a real sense of what Uranian guys have been doing with this almost incomprehensible system, Bitcoin. You know, you're talking as though we understand what you're talking about, but I don't think we all do. I'm not sure if I do. But then we can understand that the Saturn side of that is like, everyone's question is going to be, look, does it work? Is it actually real, or is this some geek's invention? Does it work? I mean, I've heard expressions about how it could not work as well. The Saturn side of it is like it consumes too much electricity when you mine the coins, I've been told. You know, and I did a calculation once and worked out it would cost something in the order of £300 billion to mine the last coin in the series, which is, of course, probably false. I've moved off the point. But anyway, Chiron, yes, I think you're right. Right, Lena, Chiron is the key, always the key. And the main thing with Chiron is that we shift our perception. We change the way we think. And I think that may be the bottom line here. We have to change what we think of as Uranus. And I think of it as mind, divine mind. And I think of Neptune as focus, strangely. I mean, I know the reputation of Neptune is the very opposite, but Neptune is glamour. It's the illusion, it's Maya. And whatever you expect to see, that's what you get to see in the world. And it's false. It's only you that sees that, and you think of it as real. And that's what Neptune is. It's telling us that what is actually false, that's real. That's Neptune's job. Well, that's what the focus of our attention does. You know, we're focusing on astrology, telling us that astrology's making reality the way it is. And that's our Neptune glamour. We're all lost in this illusion that astrology is meaningful, you know, and so because we give our attention to it. I'm being a little bit humorous there, I hope. And Pluto is just the fact that we're living in I would like to sort of perceive reality as a cauldron with a flame underneath it, a cooking pot, basically. And Pluto's job is just to make sure that nothing is the same tomorrow that it was today. Nothing at all. And that's all it's doing. It's got no agenda whatever except to keep the pot boiling. You know, and if you want to know what's going on in the world, in your own world inside or on the outer world, all you do is you look at the pot. And what you look with, you've got no choice. You're going to look with Neptune. You're bound to see a false take on it. You know this story of a blind man approaching an elephant. And first of all, well, there's three blind men approaching an elephant, and one grabs its tail and thinks of it as like a bell ringing device. And the other grabs its leg and thinks of it as a massive tree. And the other grabs its trunk and thinks of it as something else. And they're all seeing the elephant, and they're all absolutely convinced of what they're seeing. Totally different from the other people. Well, that's what our Neptune is. And so when we look at this cooking pot of Pluto, we're all applying our Neptune consciousness to it, which is motivated by our mentation, our divine mind, which is Uranus. So Uranus's job is to energize us to have an opinion, to have a focus. And then Neptune sort of says, yeah, what do you want to believe in? What lie would you like to believe in today? I've got all the movies that you can think of, you know, life's a movie. And Pluto is just saying, well, it's going to be different tomorrow. And I think it's that simple, you know, but then
don't you think that our whole birth charts are one big Neptune, serving as one big Neptune? The whole configuration that each one of us has in the chart, like, for example, if you have more planets in Earth signs, like I think is probably your case, maybe this would be a personality tending to side a bit more with Saturnian ideals, just on the balance between, say, Saturn and Uranus. Another personality like Dwayne, that's very prominently Uranian, with many planets in Aquarius and many other things like that going on, maybe he would be a bit biased on the other direction. And but this is through the whole, I mean, the concocted pot that you described, I imagine that as the whole birth chart that is kind of turning us into a prism of reality that's only our own and very personally our own. But maybe those moments like today, when we have turning points in big cycles that affect us all, are points where we are just stirred to think about those things, to imagine, to discuss, to see how, we all go to excesses here and there. We all displaying to each other our own biases a little bit. And that's making it so much more interesting. And I just think of today as a potent moment for that, as it's, I think, a very, very energized discussion. Not every time it's like that. What do
I
you
just
think?
want to add one thing about that, taking what you said about Chiron, Radalina, and what you said about going to the degree before, is how the degree of 6 degrees is that inner stability of Chiron's, like you get to the inner stability, and it's almost like the base of then the fulcrum of a balancing, weighing, when you're weighing things of two polarities, that at the 7, the dual nature of spirit, matter, heaven, earth, sky, earth, whatever. And then the 6th degree is the inner stability that is a Chiron is at that, and that's going to help somehow give the healing. You find the inner stability, and then you're able to deal with holding polarity or holding squares,
Yes.
holding change.
Sure.
Can I
Sure.
come in, because Lauren, you've just touched exactly upon what I've been thinking while you've all been talking, and going back to Barbara Hand Clough, who wrote a lot about Chiron and Saturn and Uranus, and I was thinking of the theory of Jung, talking about the opposites and the meeting of the opposites, and meaning that, when you have opposites, like, Uranus and Saturn, maybe, or any opposites inside ourselves, we have to kind of hold those opposites, really hold the tension of them, and hold them until at some point, literally, like Jung was doing. And I was thinking about Chiron in this particular instance. I think Chiron was an alchemist, wasn't he? Because he was taught all kinds of divination by, who was his teacher? Somebody probably does know. But anyway, that, this, it's the how do you call it? The birth of the third. You got the two opposites, and then there is a third that is born, and that is the new attitude. But that comes from suffering the two opposites for a while. And that is, that's something, a totally non-rational process. And I'm thinking about that, that kind of speaks to me, that has meaning to me. It might not have meaning to anyone else, but this has suddenly come to me because I've been thinking a lot about Chiron and its job between Uranus and Saturn, because it's not stable. It goes around in elliptic movement. Anyway, that's my thought about this. I don't know if anyone can relate to it at all or not at all, but to apply that particular, what Jung called the transcendent function.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if any one of you knows where is Chiron right now in terms of the orbits of Saturn and Uranus. You know how sometimes it crosses over one and the other, and I haven't checked. I didn't think of checking that for today. So if any one of you knows that, please let us know, because that may be interesting to see whether at this moment Chiron is more conducive to one energy or the other, possibly.
Yeah, it's on that elliptical where something, that's what he was describing. And just to take what Simona just said and relate it to what James said, is this birth, or maybe it was Dwayne who talked about it, is the time of the birth of consciousness.
Yes.
Is what consciousness that is inside each one of us and coming from our own next step, that is what can happen at this moment in time.
Yes, and it's personal. It's from the core of each of us, you know, from the very depth of each of our souls. So it's, you know, it's personal, but it's also transpersonal.
And it's being played out in all the polarities we see everywhere, where I have friends who have absolute different points of view about what's going on, and just to allow everybody to have theirs and not be arguing and fighting, but allowing.
Yes, you know, this also reminds me of the notion of the noosphere, which probably some of you must be familiar with.
Yes,
yes, I see you nodding, Lauren. Yes.
yes,
And I can think about that in terms of, you know, the creation of new consciousness every time each of us actually come to a point of wholeness inside ourselves. That particular new consciousness is we contributed really to this sphere of the noosphere around the earth, of new consciousness, of the raising of the energy of the planet. So that's kind of what makes sense to me as we're talking. That's meaningful to me. So I don't know.
Very good.
Yes.
Could we just check in?
Right, I need to leave.
Yes,
So,
I was going to say it's
Very good.
been aimed for 2 hours, but we're well over that. So it's been just fantastic, you guys. I'm just so grateful that everybody showed up. It's been very rich, very rich.
I've really enjoyed meeting.
Gorgeous, we really appreciate it.
Thank you for coming.
Fantastic what you added, what everybody added. I'm so grateful to be part of this group. It's just, I feel so energized, ready for my walk out in nature.
Me too.
Me too.
Let's all do that. Get out of the house.
Thank you.
Love you all.
Love you. Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Dwayne and Radelina.
Thank you so much.